Senator Elizabeth Warren wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled, "Democrats Can Avoid Disaster in November." In it, the senator lists some steps that she says Democrats can take to stop the bleeding, including immediate price controls, more taxes on oil companies, and canceling all student debt, and more. With me to talk about how the Democratic Party might be able to stop the bleeding, if that's at all possible at this point, Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold, back as a guest here on the broadcast once again. Mr. Arnold, great to see you. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got Elizabeth Warren, who wrote this op-ed piece with some ideas on how she thinks the bleeding can be stopped. What do you think? I mean, is it even possible to stop that bleeding right now, stop the erosion of any kind of public support that may or may not be helpful toward 2022's midterms?
Yeah, it's really amazing because so many elected officials, so many Democrats right now are trying to move to the center because they see what you just talked about, a potentially historic loss for Democrats this November. And instead, Elizabeth Warren comes out with this op-ed in the New York Times saying, no, let's not move to the middle. Let's move as far left as we possibly can. Now, she's in Massachusetts, of course. She can afford to be a very progressive member of Congress. So for people in purple districts, or people in districts with a slightly reddish hue to them, this is absolutely devastating news to move to the left this far. Trillions of dollars of tax increases, more inflation, more spending. All of the things that voters are worried about right now, they just want to double down on it and make things even worse, economically speaking, and of course, politically speaking as well.
And it even seems some of the mainstream media is abandoning its support for President Joe Biden right now. I was perusing some websites this morning, happened to see a CNN piece, CNN, and the title was, "It's been a bad couple of days for Joe Biden." That struck me as, wow, things must really be bad if the president doesn't have CNN in his back pocket anymore.
Yeah, things are going south very quick. And like I said, you could be looking at historic losses. And this is despite the fact that redistricting is probably going to hand Democrats anywhere from 5, 6 to 7 seats. So even in this climate that is favorable to them in terms of redistricting, the politics are so bad. Inflation absolutely out of control, and Biden is not doing anything productive to fix that. He's not doing what it takes to ramp up energy production, to drive down prices, to make things easier for families to survive who are facing higher inflation and wages that are increasing, but at a rate much lower than that of inflation. So yeah, Democrats need to be running from Elizabeth Warren. They need to be running from Joe Biden. They need to be moving more to the center. Whether they can do that in time to fool voters into thinking that this is actually going to be a more fiscally responsible Congress going forward, I'm very skeptical.
In terms of those pocketbook issues, gas prices clearly are a major concern for everybody across the country right now. It was interesting, the president came out talking about his plan to make that E15 gas available this summer when it normally isn't. It's about 10 cents a gallon cheaper than regular unleaded. I don't see how 10 cents a gallon is going to save anybody any kind of significant money or make a difference come November.
Yeah, this plan is absolutely horrid from a number of different perspectives. First, if you're concerned about the environment, having more ethanol being burned is actually a bad thing for the climate. But more in the pocketbook sense, here's what's going to happen. We place more demand on the stock necessary to create ethanol, think things like soy and corn. What happens to food prices? Food prices are already out of control. Anyone who's been to the grocery store this year knows that. So you put more demand on these things that are necessary to produce ethanol. It increases food prices. It drives up inflation. So whatever gains we're getting in terms of a few cents at the pump, we're losing, and then some when we go to the grocery store. It's lousy policy. What we need is all of the above energy solution that actually produces more oil and gas, as well as alternative fuels, as well as solar, wind, everything on the table here. Unfortunately, this administration and this Congress seem solely focused on the alternative energy, not embracing the oil and gas that so many of us depend upon.
I think another issue Democrats may be discounting heading toward November is the crisis at the southern border. Obviously, it's a mess down there. We've got lots of situations happening right now. Title 42, that's going to be lifted next month. I saw a poll just this morning that talked about voter interest in border security and border crisis issues is at one of its all-time highs as of recent years. And I don't hear a lot of Democrats talking about that very issue as we move closer to November. Why are they ignoring it right now?
Well, they're just trying to not talk about it because it's bad for them politically. And you see what's happening with Title 42, as you mentioned. Democrats are absolutely irate. Moderate Democrats, border Democrats are absolutely irate with the Biden administration because they're acting unilaterally. They're treating this purely as a health matter. As it relates to COVID, which was the reason this originally went into place, but they're not also embracing the big picture here. They're not actually embracing the the immigration impacts that are taking place when you are to remove this restriction. So it's a horrible issue for Democrats. It's one that Biden, I think, really handled so poorly. Again, not embracing the issue in its entirety, not bringing in these Democrats from purple states, from border states into this conversation. It's another area where Democrats are facing really tough issues that are going to affect them in November.
I have to wonder, too, how some of the debate that's going on around the country, as we talked about earlier here in the broadcast, regarding parental rights issues may or may not affect things come November. No matter what side of the fence you're on, if you're a parent, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you want to have a voice and a say in your child's education, your child's future, what they're learning in school. And I wonder how some of the blue states that are trying to enact some different ideological policies right now may have an impact on what we see in terms of the voter turnout and the results for November.
Yeah, I think we have some recent lessons to look at. What happened in New Jersey with Republicans almost seizing the governorship there, very unexpected occurrence. And then, of course, in Virginia, where Republicans were successful in that off-year election. And the reason that they enjoyed some success, Republicans I'm speaking of, was because of education. That was first and foremost the issue that moved voters to the ballot box and got them to pull the lever in favor of Republicans. And it's because of parental rights. It's because of the ability to have a say in their child's education. Things like mask mandates obviously were huge. People feel very disconnected from the decisions that are being made for their families right now. And that's not a good thing if you're a politician. People want to be participatory when it comes to making these decisions, whether or not their child is going to wear a mask, whether or not they're going to be taught certain elements of a curriculum that may be very progressive or may be very different than they're accustomed to. So, those issues are usually local issues, but I think they're bubbling up to the national level and they become an increasingly large concern for Democrats, no doubt.
Sure. Mr. Arnold, in closing, what do you think is the one significant issue that our viewers ought to be watching and studying as we move toward those midterms in November in terms of what Democrats are going to try to do to sway the race, again, if that's even possible at this point?
I think the issue is going to come down to inflation. If we have inflation that's 8.5% as it is now, we see wholesale prices where inflation is 11%, even higher, and that's affecting our business community. If you have this level of inflation, there's just no way Democrats can get out from under it. They're trying to blame Putin right now. They're trying to, of course, blame COVID, which they've done for a long time. And those things have contributed to inflation. But unless they're actually able to come out with some real solutions to drive down inflation, to make the cost of living, paying our utility bills, paying our rent, buying groceries, these basic staples that we all rely upon, it's going to be bad news for Democrats in November.